What is up, my bodyweight warriors? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about pancakes, and no, not the delicious food, the very undelicious and painful mobility exercise. If you don't know what a pancake is essentially when you're sat in a straddle on the floor, you fold forwards and you go as flat as a pancake, or that is the end goal. In today's video, I'm going to give you 3 tips on how you can improve your pancake training. Tip number 1, and probably the most important tip, learn to use your hips. I talked about this already in a video about how to properly stretch your hamstrings, which I'll link to in the description. But essentially, you want to learn how to twerk. You want to learn how to anteriorly tilt those hips when you're in that pancake so you can properly fold flat. If you don't learn to do this, you're basically going to never be able to go completely flat, and you're always going to be limited by the amount of flexion you can get in your lumbar spine, which ultimately probably isn't the best thing. So how do we compensate for this? Well, primarily we'll be using a neutral spine when you train the pancake. That's kind of the easiest way. That means there's not going to be any movement that's going to be compensating through the back. You're just going to be focusing on tilting those hips, which is so important. This doesn't mean that you never want to train with a flexed back. Sometimes it's useful and it can be applied well. It's just that when you want to learn how to tilt the hips, it is probably the most exposing way of doing it by keeping your back flat. This kind of brings me on to the second point. Because we're using a neutral spine, you want to find a progression that is right for you. And what I mean by this is how high you have your hips. Basically, you want to find a surface that you can comfortably sit with your back at 90 degrees in a straddle with a slight anterior pelvic tilt. So if you cannot sit on the floor with your back at that 90-degree point, then you need to raise your hips. At the easiest end of the spectrum, this would be something like a straddle good morning, which I detailed in that hamstring video. Then you would lower on to something like a chair, a bench, a box, and eventually you'd move down to a plate or mats, and then progressively you would get to the floor. And once you can sit happily on the floor, 90 degree, straight back, a slight tilt in the hips, you're good to go to train on the floor. I would recommend that if you're doing elevated work, that you might want to have a slight bend in the knee, because one, this will actually give you a better stretch through the hamstrings. Trust me, try it both ways and you'll feel a greater stretch in the hamstring with a slight bend. But also you don't want to hang out too much on that ligament system behind the knee. It's not the most fun long term. And finally, tip number 3 is going to be use your own strength. And the reason I'm talking about this is because people usually jump into pancake training and they just whack a great load of weight on their back and then just fold forward and do reps, which is okay, but there's something to be said for learning how to use your own strength to go deeper into a stretch. What I mean by this is from Pavels Satsaline, I actually don't know how to say his name, Pavels' book, Relax into Stretch, which I highly recommend you grab. It's a good resource to have. He talks about using your own strength to go deeper into a stretch. And what he means by this is using the antagonistic muscle, so the muscle opposite the one you are stretching. In this case, probably going to be the hip flexors, the hip internal rotators, and the quads. And then you're basically going to use that muscle to contract, and then what this will do is it will inhibit the antagonistic muscle, which is the one we're stretching. So by contracting the hip flexors and trying to pull ourselves deeper into the pancake, you actually are going to help relax the hamstring. And this method can be done in kind of a contract, relax. That being said, you can just throw some weight on your back and try to rep it out as well. Again, applying tips number 1 and 2 first. But that is kind of all the tips I would give you. In terms of how you can do this, I would recommend you can hold it either for a static position, 30 to 120 seconds. The static long holding stretch can work. However, I find you get better results either using a contract, relax or PNF technique, something like 5 to 10 second contraction followed by a 5 to 10 second relaxation, and repeating that for about a minute. Or you could just throw some weight on and perform reps. A really good starting point would be 10 reps with a 10-second pause in that final rep on the furthest position that you can go into the stretch. And this is again something I've detailed in my loaded mobility routine. Again, I'll link all of that in the description down below. That is kind of it for the pancake. If you have any more questions, leave a comment down below, join the conversation. I'll do my best to answer. Or if you're sick of hearing from me, you can go over to the Facebook group, join the community over there. There's over 3,000 people active in that group, sharing their progress. If you just enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button, support the channel. You can also support the channel by grabbing yourself a Bodyweight Warrior t-shirt. They are linked in the description down below, and they're currently 20% off for an end of summer sale. So if you want to grab one, there's only a limited amount of stock, but I'll link that down below with everything else I've talked about today. But that is it for this week, guys. Have a strong and stretchy week. Peace.